Behind his peaked cap and cigarette smoke, Thomas Shelby is not just a ruthless gang leader or a savvy businessman. He is a chilling textbook example of how trauma and shattered souls can shape human psychology. With a cool head amidst bloodshed and power plays, Shelby navigates the chaotic lines of life with hidden agendas and schemes decipherable only by the sharpest minds. However, behind his cold gaze lies a story of tragedy often left unspoken, a wartime history that forged a soul as hard as steel, only to leave behind subtle cracks unseen. Hero or villain, victim or executioner. Thomas Shelby's psychology is painted with shades of grey, a mosaic of ambition, fear, and shattered hope. Delving into the mind of Thomas Shelby, we not only witness the journey of a fictional character, we are given a magnifying glass to peek into the soul torn between a brutal world and a desire to transcend the boundaries carved by his personal history. This psychological exploration will peel back layer by layer of Thomas Shelby's persona, delving deeper into the intricately woven fabric of his life and questioning what truly propels a man to become a Birmingham street legend. This analysis not only opens our insights into the character in the series, but also touches on broader discussions about the mental state trapped between the world of warfare and the post-World War I uncertainties. Is Thomas Shelby a reflection of the darkness that can hide within us all? 1. Trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Thomas Shelby, a classic example of a war veteran suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Shelby's experiences in World War I, particularly in the underground tunnels of France, provide a crucial background that leads to chronic mental suffering. The post-traumatic stress disorder he experiences is reflected in various behaviors. Shelby is often seen experiencing war flashbacks, terrorizing nightmares, and exaggerated reactions to loud noises or sudden shocks, all hallmarks of PTSD. He also exhibits avoidance behavior, such as emotional numbing and reluctance to discuss his experiences. He responds to trauma by seeking absolute control over his environment, often through violence. This is a typical adaptation mechanism where control is seen as a means of managing anxiety and fear of uncertainty. The violence Thomas displays is not just a tool to achieve goals in the dark criminal world, but also a way to suppress and control disturbing memories from the war. However, Shelby also shows a complex, more considered side, intelligent, strategic, and charismatic. He leverages his trauma and military experience to benefit his business. His firm leadership and meticulous planning are the result of military training. His ability to remain calm under pressure, his calculated actions, and his charismatic appeal are characteristics that make him stand out as an effective leader. Thomas Shelby also struggles in establishing healthy interpersonal relationships. Although he fiercely protects his family, he often struggles to show affection openly and is vulnerable to emotional isolation. Nevertheless, he is able to nurture strong and loyal relationships, indicating that, beneath the violence and emotional shield, he still seeks connection and understanding. A deeper analysis reveals that the addiction to cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs often seen in Shelby can be interpreted as an attempt to manage PTSD symptoms, including insomnia, anxiety, and mood disorders. Substance abuse is common among those suffering from PTSD and can add complexity to the management of his psychological and emotional conditions. The series shows how individuals with PTSD can function and even succeed in various areas of life while still battling their personal demons. The realistic portrayal of Thomas Shelby's PTSD from a psychological perspective adds depth to his character and raises awareness of the reality of the disorder in the post-war era. It offers insights into how psychological strengths and weaknesses can coexist in the inner struggle of a tireless man, Thomas Shelby. 2. Leadership and Machiavellianism. Thomas Shelby, the central figure in the series Peaky Blinders, is a perfect example of the Machiavellian paradigm in leadership. His psychological profile depicts an individual adept at controlling and manipulating situations to pursue his goals. He builds his business empire with an iron hand, applying principles aligned with Niccolò Machiavelli's work, The Prince, where the end justifies the means. From a Machiavellian perspective, Thomas's leadership is not only focused on outcomes but also on processes that facilitate the achievement of those outcomes by any means necessary, including the use of power, deception, and betrayal. Machiavellian psychology is often associated with three main characteristics: realistic in political approach, unbound by conventional morality, and focused on pragmatic self-interest. This can be seen in Thomas Shelby's management of the conflicts he faces. He is not hesitant to use violence or deception, but he does so not without calculation. Every step is designed to ensure the survival and supremacy of the Peaky Blinders family. Perhaps to some, such methodologies may seem cruel, but Thomas sees it as a necessity in facing a harsh and unforgiving world. Thomas's leadership psychology is also influenced by the traumatic experiences of World War I, which amplify his Machiavellian tendencies. The trauma shapes his view of the world as a continuous battlefield, where only the strongest and smartest can survive. This explains why he is willing to take extreme measures to protect his family and business. Additionally, Thomas also possesses charisma and intelligence, allowing him to gain the trust of others while maintaining his position. He understands the importance of appearance and perception and uses them to build and maintain his image as a strong and unwavering leader. Thomas Shelby's character is a perfect example of how Machiavellianism can function effectively in leadership. It may not be an idealized model in modern or conventional contexts, but the discussion about the complexity of his character and leadership style provides interesting insights into the qualities sometimes necessary to navigate an environment filled with risks and uncertainties. The combination of strengths and weaknesses, as well as Thomas's actions and motivations, opens up broader discussions about the psychology of leadership and the influence of Machiavellianism on it, offering a more realistic view of the complexity and depth of character in the narrative. 3. Emotional control and emotional intelligence. Thomas Shelby in Peaky Blinders is a complex, realistic character, layered with intriguing psychological aspects to analyze, especially regarding emotional control and emotional intelligence. On the surface, Thomas appears as a figure unaffected by emotions, portraying calmness and rationality. His greatest strength lies in his ability to separate emotions from actions, allowing him to make logical decisions even under great pressure. He rarely shows fear or uncertainty in public, positioning himself as a strong leader in the eyes of his followers. However, the emotional control Thomas displays often stems from psychological defense mechanisms in response to trauma. His experiences in the battlefield may have trained him to suppress emotions for survival. In a social context, this means Thomas can use emotional intelligence to read and manipulate others without letting their emotions affect him, a characteristic of a complex anti-hero. Thomas's emotional intelligence also highlights another aspect: his ability to understand what others need or want and use it to advance his own strategic agenda. However, this often comes at a price. Thomas sometimes appears alienated from his closest relationships, reinforcing the impression that his ability to control his emotions successfully also leads to loneliness. We can see how his ability to control emotions and his intelligence sometimes lead to cold and calculating actions that hurt those around him. This may be a reflection of his own alienation and his inability to fully process his personal trauma. Ultimately, Thomas Shelby is evidence that emotional control and emotional intelligence are double-edged swords. While these characteristics give him an advantage in a harsh and unforgiving world, they also contribute to his own internal conflicts, causing damage and distance in his relationships. Peaky Blinders carefully explores these tensions, providing audiences with insight into how psychological strengths can be a source of both setback and progress. 4. Loyalty and internal conflict. Thomas Shelby, the protagonist of the drama series Peaky Blinders, is a character rich in psychological nuances, colored by a background of wartime trauma and internal conflicts that influence every aspect of his leadership and interactions with family and allies. Loyalty is a common theme running through Thomas's life. Loyalty to his family, the Peaky Blinders gang, and his values. He is a man who prioritizes family honor but often walks a fine line between maintaining group integrity and preserving his own interests. His actions are often guided by a desire to protect his loved ones, even through ethically questionable means. His internal conflict is evident in how he treats his associates and family. Thomas sees family as the foundation of his existence but often sacrifices personal relationships for the greater good, an aspect of his leadership crisis. He seeks absolute loyalty from those close to him, yet he himself sometimes violates the same principles, as if there are two different standards between what he expects and what he does. The struggle to maintain family loyalty often conflicts with the need to protect them from the harsh realities of his ambitions and actions. He is caught in a quagmire between being the man he wants to be and the reality of the man required by circumstances. This creates internal conflicts where he sometimes has to distance himself from the people he loves to keep them psychologically safe. Taking all this into account, Thomas Shelby's psychology is a practice of responsibility, burdened leadership, and constant struggle with shadows of the past. Although he appears tough and unyielding, there is vulnerability in his consciousness that he shields with a tight facade. Loyalty and internal conflict not only make him a complex character but also show how personal experiences shape decision-making and relationship dynamics. 5. Ambition and drive for success. His ambition is not only economic or material but also includes a desire to elevate his family's social status and ensure his dominance not only in the underworld but also on the political stage. This ambition is a response to trauma and the void left by the war, where Shelby seeks to fill that space with power and control. Shelby's drive for success can be traced back to his continuous exposure to life and death situations in war. This shapes his view that life is a series of opportunities to be seized. He seizes every opportunity with the courage and shrewdness shaped by survival tactics he applied on the battlefield. However, this drive also comes at a cost. Shelby's inner peace is often overshadowed by his obsession with power and influence. He uses manipulation, violence, and intelligence as tools, but in the process, often sacrifices personal relationships and opportunities to pursue more authentic happiness. Despite being surrounded by family and friends, Shelby often appears isolated, a legacy of the wounds he carries deep within. His personality is marked by emotional denial, shielded by layers of bravery and resilience. His ambition and drive may be a form of escape from the pain he causes himself and experiences. A being driven by goals without considering the cost of morality is a characteristic of entrepreneurs seeking absolute power. Thomas Shelby also becomes a prototype of an entrepreneur who uses his instincts to read and manipulate others to achieve his goals. He shows how risky decisions and constant dissatisfaction with the status quo can lead to remarkable success, but also how solitude can be a faithful companion to the ambitious. Therefore, Thomas Shelby is an intriguing case study of how one's ambition and drive for success can be equally inspiring and destructive. In pursuing his goals, Shelby paints a vivid picture of the psychological costs that may need to be paid by those tirelessly pursuing their ambitions. 6. Relationships. With psychodynamic frameworks and modern theories as analytical tools, we can unravel the influence of his past experiences on the relationships he forms. His relationship with family, especially his siblings, is rooted in unwavering loyalty but often tainted by manipulation and power. Shelby uses his intellect and influence to protect, often through authoritarian and sometimes unethical methods. When analyzing his relationships with female characters in the series, such as Grace Burgess and May Carlton, we see a polarity between the desire for closeness and the inability to fully let down his guard. Grace in this scenario is Thomas's most obvious weakness, someone who manages to pierce through his emotional shield but also becomes his Achilles heel. In the context of his social and political relationships, Shelby operates with a zero-sum perspective, where he must win for others to lose. His business relationships are often fraught with manipulation and power strategies, a reflection of survival tactics he acquired in the battlefield. The influence of social class on Shelby's psychology should not be overlooked. Raised in poverty in post-war Birmingham and as part of the working class, he developed an unrelenting ambition to break free from existing socio-economic constraints. This leads to a series of choices that prioritize the rise in status and power over personal happiness or morality. Most notable is how his adaptive power strategies play a role in his relationships. Shelby exhibits key traits of a survivor, not only surviving but also striving to master his surroundings. This makes him a formidable figure in social interactions. He strategically uses others as pawns in his life's chess game. However, Shelby also cannot fully detach from his capacity for empathy or love. When these moments arise, they come with deep intensity, often touching on his most hidden vulnerabilities. Therefore, Thomas Shelby embodies a story of perpetual battle between the courage to pursue what he desires and fatalism as acceptance of the limitations he faces. This multifaceted psychology makes his character so captivating and complex, offering a profound insight into the psyche of a person hardened by circumstances yet still seeking meaning and purpose in chaos. In this regard, Shelby is not just a stubborn fictional character, but also a reflection of human resilience and vulnerability. 7. Courage and fatalism. From a psychological perspective, Shelby's courage often blends with a sense of fatalism, acceptance of the possibility of failure or death without succumbing to fear. This can be seen in his bold yet measured approach to conflicts and threats. As a master strategist, he executes his plans with careful calculation, but often with an acceptance of all consequences, even the worst. One of the contrasts that makes Shelby's character compelling is how he turns his experiences of violence and trauma into strength. Shelby's PTSD, often depicted in glimpses of nightmares and flashbacks, is not just a melodramatic subplot. Instead, it adds depth to his character. The hidden fear and anxiety behind his courage in facing his adversaries give the impression that Shelby is fighting two wars, one on the streets of Birmingham and another in his mind. Against the backdrop of post-war Britain grappling with economic depression and social uncertainty, Shelby uses the intelligence and social exceptions he experiences as driving forces. His ambition to elevate his family's status from a working-class background to social elite is driven not only by a lust for power, but also by a desire for stability and recognition. Here, Shelby's psychology shows how courage is compensated by fatalism as an adaptation to a world he feels cannot be fully controlled. In his relationships with others, especially family and lovers, there is often ambivalence. Shelby holds them close in the same way he runs his business, with authority, protection, but also a tendency to manipulate. This reflects the psychological defense he developed to protect the vulnerabilities beneath the facade of courage and calmness. His desire for authentic connection struggles with the fundamental distrust he has for others, often leading to a struggle between intimacy and distance. So, Thomas Shelby embodies a story of a perpetual battle between the courage to pursue what he desires and fatalism as acceptance of the limitations he faces. This multifaceted psychology makes his character captivating and complex, offering a profound insight into the psyche of a person hardened by circumstances yet still seeking meaning and purpose in chaos. In this regard, Shelby is not just a stubborn, fictional character, but also a reflection of human resilience and vulnerability. We see Thomas as the embodiment of ambition forged in the fire of social injustice. His courage is a response to the uncertainties of his time. However, behind the facade of that strength, there is a fatalistic side that emerges from his deep understanding of the nature of death and transience. Shelby's anthems are not just narratives of power, they are odysseys of despair arranged in elegies of authority. The psychological analysis of Thomas Shelby reveals how deeply rooted trauma influences the dynamics of his relationships, both personally and professionally. In a world where every interaction has the potential to become a psychological duel, Shelby uses a mask of calmness to deceive his opponents, while also as a shield to hide his own vulnerabilities. Often the anxiety and paranoia born from his PTSD manifest in the form of harsh and cruel decisions, perhaps as a manifestation of the ever-burning desire to regain control over his once uncertain life. In every decision he makes, there sometimes appears a glimmer of hope for redemption. However, it is often more influenced by entrenched fatalism, exacerbated by the grim realities of the world inhabited by Shelby. He is the architect of his own fate, paradoxically bound tightly to a history of inevitable violence and power, determining his hegemonic choices. Thomas Shelby, though trapped in the web of fatalism, is not a passive subject in his story. He becomes a symbol of resistance against inevitable misfortune, while carrying wounds that, though not always visible, are deeply felt by the audience. His story is a reflection that may be all too real for many, a reminder that often the deepest wounds are the ones we choose to silence. At the end of the journey, we are presented with a complex reflection on humanity that may be overlooked by many, the vulnerable side in the face of an unforgiving world. Goodbye, thank you.